How's it going guys, Chris here with a little Dying Light 2 settings guide for you today, just running over the different settings in the menus and letting you know what everything is and my personal recommendations. Should probably point out that this guide is mainly for console versions of Dying Light 2, as I'm pretty sure the PC versions will probably have a few different settings in the menus. Anyway, before we dive into this video, I just want to say that if you want the most optimal performance while you play the game, and you want it to feel as responsive as possible with the lowest input lag, which I assume you most likely will, probably be a bit daft if you didn't, then I'd highly recommend hopping into your TV settings and making sure that you've got game mode enabled first. Pretty much all modern TVs have a game mode feature built into them, most of which can be found and switched on and off in the TV's general settings, and this is going to make your gameplay feel a bit more responsive and smoother, which in a game that features a lot of quick movement like Dying Light 2 is going to make a really big difference. So getting into the actual game settings themselves, we can see a bunch of tabs at the top of the screen which can be alternated between by using the bumpers. We're first met with the Game tab, and at the top of the list, if you're in the game already, then you'll be able to see the difficulty setting, letting you increase and decrease the difficulty depending on what kind of experience you're after. I've got this set to medium just for a nice balance. The three settings below this are all to do with sound, and at default are all set to the max, which is 40. I've actually gone and turned both the music and special effects sliders down a bit, just so I can hear the speech slightly clearer while playing the game. It's a story-driven game with lots of dialogue, so missing out on important speech because the music's blaring out loud or the game's sound effects are too loud can sometimes be a little bit annoying. Though if this doesn't bother you, leave these sliders as they are or adjust them according to your own personal taste. Below this we've got an option called Streamer Mode. Don't worry, turning this on isn't going to throw you up on Twitch or anything. It basically just disables any music that might be licensed while you play, which could result in a copyright strike for creators. I have this enabled, not because I'm a streamer, but because I do make content on the game, so it makes sense for me to have this switched on. But if you're not a content creator or streamer, which most of you probably won't be, then you've got nothing to worry about, and might as well just leave this switched off. Further down the list we've got our audio output settings, where you can pick the appropriate option for your own setup. So if you're using TV speakers, pick TV, home cinema or headphones, and so on. And this is just going to provide the best listening experience for you. Subtitles, we've got those off. With that said, I know a lot of people sometimes like having these on, as even I do sometimes on single player games, so I'll leave this one up to you. And of course, if you do decide to have the subtitles on, you can customise them with size and colour options with the few tabs below. I'd probably recommend leaving the size on medium if you do, though if you're playing on a smaller screen and those subtitles are hard to read, bumping it up to large will probably sort you out. Below the subtitle settings, we'll be able to find an option called QTE Hold Mode, which basically stands for QuickTime Event Hold Mode. QuickTime events are those moments where you have to tap certain buttons to do things like opening specific doors and performing certain actions, and normally you'd have to keep tapping the buttons quickly to complete the event. These can sometimes be a little bit annoying or tricky to do for some people, so if you don't really want to have to do that, I'd recommend having this option turned on, as it now lets you just hold the QTE buttons instead of having to frantically tap them during these events. Next we've got an option called Enable Hints, which I'd probably recommend having on if you're new to the game, but after a few hours of playing or when you've got the hang of the controls and mechanics, you might prefer to switch this one off, just so those hints don't keep popping up and getting in the way on the screen. And the last setting in this column is Swap Weapon. This basically means that if you want to pick something up in the environment and start using it straight away, perhaps you've found a really cool blade or something that's got some good damage stats, then having this option turned on just lets you equip that blade nice and quickly if you hold down the action button, which is X on PS5. Moving over to the HUD tab next, this is where we'll be able to hide and view certain HUD elements on the screen. Using L2 and R2 lets you flip between some presets, though you can also customise the HUD to your own preferences too. I've personally chosen to turn the top three settings off, just so the game feels a little bit more immersive and a bit more like the first Dying Light game. If you have these turned on, it'll be a bit more like an RPG with health bars above your enemies, but I find that these can sometimes clutter up the screen and get in the way, though it does give you a little bit more information during combat, if you'd rather have it. Plus having the awakening bar off also makes creeping around sleeping infected feel a little bit more tenser. I've got the immunity timer on. This just lets you see your infection progress in the dark, which is a handy thing to know, also something that doesn't clutter up the screen very much. The stamina bar is pretty much an essential mechanic in Dying Light 2, letting you see how much you can swing your weapons and climb obstacles, and I've also chosen to keep this visible. And last of all, Show Dot Crosshair, which just makes life easier by having that central crosshair visible in the middle of your screen. Next over to the right is the Video tab, and the first thing that you'll notice if you're playing on the newer consoles is a graphics preference setting at the top. By default this is set to performance, which basically gives you a higher frame rate of 60 FPS, but unfortunately dips the resolution down to about 1080p. On resolution mode, this does bump up the pixel count and increases the resolution, but it also dips the frame rate down to 30 FPS, making the picture look better and crisper, at the expense of a less fluid, choppier performance. And the third option you'll be able to pick here is quality, which enables ray tracing to give the game better shadows and lighting, making the environments look more natural and realistic, at the expense of dipping both the resolution and the frame rate down to about 1080p 30fps, which can definitely seem like a big trade-off. If you don't mind lower frame rates, then you might want to test out either the resolution or quality modes. But if you're a little bit like me and you've been spoiled by higher frame rates in other games, then the performance mode is probably your best bet. Especially with Dying Light 2 often being a pretty fast-paced action game with lots of movement, as that higher frame rate will probably make countering enemies and timing jumps a little bit easier as you play. As for the gamma setting, I've got this at 20, this just darkens and brightens your picture a little bit if necessary. Film grain effect, got that switched off, as it doesn't really do anything for gameplay, and colorblind mode, I've got that off too. If you do happen to be colorblind, then you'll definitely want to enable this, and find the setting that's right for yourself. Moving on to the controls tab next, at the top, you'll be given the option to invert the Y-axis. Now this basically means that if you press up on the right joystick, you'll look down, and if you press down, you'll look up. Sounds a bit backwards, but a lot of people out there like myself do prefer to play this way, and if you are one of those people, make sure this setting is switched on. Stick sensitivity controls how sensitive your camera speed is when looking around. I have this set to about 14, but play around with this one to see which number is best for you. Too high can make being precise trickier, but too low can make it more awkward when you need to turn around quickly. As for the dead zone setting, I recommend having this as low as possible, especially if you use stick extenders like Control Freaks. The lower this is, the more responsive the joysticks are, though if you do notice that your view starts to drift around, then I'd definitely advise turning this up slightly. Vibration, got this setting on, just for a bit of added immersion. Auto aim and auto aim melee are both switched on. This just helps to give you a bit more assistance by slowing the camera down when your crosshair moves over an enemy, making it easier to land hits on them. Turn this off if you want a bit more of a challenge. And because I play inverted, I've also chosen to invert the paraglider controls too, so if you play inverted, you might want to do that as well. Expert grappling hook controls, I've got that on. Just gives you another way to use the grappling hook by pressing both L1 and R1 together. And the next three options below this I've also turned on too. This just makes traversal slightly easier and prevents you from falling to your death as much while you navigate around the environment. You can still fall and get killed, but this just helps to give you a bit more assistance, though for more of a challenge, you could always switch all of these off if you wish. The last tab is the online settings, and if you're just playing the single player on your own, you don't really need to mess around with these settings. But if you want to play with friends or others online, you can do things here like enable voice chat and play with its volume, and select how frequently other players can join you. So anyway, that just about covers the settings for Dying Light 2 Stay Human. Thanks for watching guys, hope the guide helped you out, give us a thumbs up if it did, and subscribe for more guides and videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in that next one.